Hello, my friends, and welcome to my studio. I am Susan Smith. You're in my studio, Stitched by Susan, for an episode of Live and Unscripted. I've got coffee in hand, ready to start quilting today. We are working on an edge-to-edge quilting design. That's kind of my specialty. If you're not familiar with that term, it just means the same quilting design over the entire quilt. No stopping for different blocks or seams or thread changes or anything like that. I'm going to be quilting my all over feather design. If you love it, I do have a free class teaching this design. There's a link in the description. It lives there all the time, so you can always find that class. The project in hand today is flannel. So we'll be talking a little bit about working with flannel because it's a little more stretchy and a little more, just needs a little more attention than regular quilting cotton does. Both front and back are flannel, and the backing is pieced almost as much as the front. So it's kind of like a two-sided quilt. So it'll be a really fun project. So do we want to put a few hellos up on the screen, Mr. Producer, before we dive right into the quilting? Just a couple of to see who's chiming in. Mary in rainy, oh gosh, I can't even say it, Ontario. Welcome. Denise working on striped metered corners or stripped. Nice. Janice here from New York. Awesome. And Julie from St. Joe, Missouri. Missouri? I think that's right. Canadian here. I don't always know the abbreviations. Lori, first time here. So glad I found you. Well, welcome, Lori. You'll get to see what it's all about today. It's a very typical episode today. Goat Quilter working on a quilt, doing practice with the Paisley. I think you mean 2.0 because I don't think I had a 3.0. My version to get to yours. Now I get it. Okay, got it. I'm catching up. Nicole, hi from Spirit Lake, Idaho. That's fairly near to me. Quilting and True Crime Addict. I love it. It's funny how many quilters are listeners to True Crime podcasts, myself included. And Donna from Baraboo, Wisconsin. Love that. All right. Well, to all of you who are here live, welcome. To those of you who are watching in a replay, catch a live because then you get to ask questions. Anyway, we're going to get to the quilting. I'll take one last sip of coffee and we'll dive right in. One more comment, Mr. Producer says, Austin, thank you for the scraps. Good. So backstory for those of you who don't know it, a few weeks back, I did several live sessions where I was sewing a scrappy quilt, and then I quilted it too on an episode. Anyway, Austin chimed into a couple of those episodes that he hadn't collected very many scraps yet, hadn't been quilting for a long period of time. So I sent Austin scraps because gosh knows I have more of them than I know what to do with. So Austin's got some scraps to work with. All right, let's get started. I'm going to grab the quilt backing and I'll show you guys because like I said, the backing is pieced almost as much as the front. Can you see that? Unfold it. There we go. So it's got a ton of pieces. See that? I love it. Love it. So this is one of those quilts where you need to be honest about the state of it, right? So what I did, it came to me in the mail. The client is Bev, by the way, and she knows I'm doing this today. And I spread a quilt backing and a quilt like this literally out on my studio floor because I need to know what I'm getting into, right? I need to know, for example, does it lay flat? I'm happy to report, yes, it does. So it'll be fairly easy to do. I'm not dealing with any, terrible puckering or anything like that. And I need to know things like, does the top need to be centered precisely in some way on this backing? It really doesn't. The piecing is fairly irregular, and Bev was kind enough to put kind of larger pieces at the edges. Because what I don't want is for my quilt top to end like a 1/4 inch past one of those seams, right? That would look kind of ugly on the back. So I want to kind of pay attention to my placement of the top. So I sort of assessed all of that on my studio floor in a really fancy way, crawling about on my hands and knees before I got ready to load it. So I just like to know what I'm getting into, right, before I start loading it. And I am intentionally loading this quilt with the length of it running along my rails. That's the most efficient way to load a quilt on the long arm, simply because as I'm quilting it, then I have fewer advances because the short distance runs from front to back. So whenever I can, that's the direction in which I load a quilt. I'm loading with my red snapper, so there's a little red rod inside my leader already, and this just snaps over top.
sort of got lost in the way that the QQ and the super things.
And as I'm loading, a couple of things I want to mention that our beginning was a little rocky this morning, and so I kind of forgot in the hubbub. But one is, you are more than welcome to ask questions throughout the show, and I will take pauses from time to time and read them and answer them. If you will put QQ in front of your questions, that enables Mr. Producer Dave to be able to search for them and find them among the rash of comments, right? So that is very helpful when you have a question. Put QQ in front of it. The other thing is, YouTube now offers a little nifty feature called Super Thanks. This is entirely optional, but if you wish to support my channel, if you're watching on a larger device, I'm not sure what it looks like on a phone, but on any larger device, there's a Super Thanks button right below an episode, and you'll see this all over YouTube. Everyone has that availability. But if you wanted to support my channel, which is otherwise, of course, free to you, that is an opportunity to do it. And I think it's for as little as $1.99, I believe. So that's an option, and we sure appreciate it. All contributions like that go straight into new lighting and cameras and so forth for the studio. We're always trying to raise our game. Okay, here's one of the things with flannel that I have to pay attention to. It is definitely more stretchy than cotton, right? So you won't visibly probably see me doing anything different. I'm just hyper aware. Are there any rumples or wrinkles happening across here? Is it pulling toward one side or the other? And as I roll it up, I'm going to be really aware of that because it's all too easy for flannel to stretch out of shape a little bit. So all I've done now is attached my front edge of the quilt to the front rail. I've thrown the rest of my backing over the back rail, and now I'm going to roll it on. Actually, I'm going to walk around and straighten it all out first. And by the way, just this week, I pushed publish on my brand new course, which is called Machine Quilting for Beginners. And one of the things in that is a really close look, teaching instruction on how I load my quilts. So if you are interested in more details on that, it is available in that course, and there's a link for that at the very top of the description in this episode as well. And I go through how I load it with red snappers, and I go through the same overall method, but done with pins, in case you're not a red snapper user. And that course is, just to be totally clear, it is not about free motion quilting designs. It is about all the brass tacks, I call them, of quilting. So how to load, like what batting to choose, how to baste for a sit-down machine, how to prep your machine at a sit-down machine for quilting. So I demo all those types of things at the Longarm where appropriate and at my domestic sewing machine where appropriate. So there is some quilting in the course, but that's not really the emphasis, like the actual quilting patterns or designs. The emphasis is on the practical things, how to baste a quilt at the Longarm, how to keep it square, all that sort of thing, what needles to use. So I am quilting on a Bernina Q24. The 24 simply means that's the measurement from the needle to the back of the machine. That's the throat space. And that is a big machine. And I love it. Let's see, what else am I using today? I have 100% polyester Isacord brand thread loaded. And I'll show you the foot that I'm quilting with in a moment. There's our backing loaded. Now I'm pretty happy with how smooth that is laying. I'm actually quite happy with how smooth that is laying. If I saw unevennesses throughout it, what I would do, and maybe I'll show you this just in case, because this will sometimes happen when you have a highly pieced quilt. I would literally roll it back and forth a couple of times. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm rolling in one direction, and then I'm going to put my clamp on and roll it back in the other direction while holding, you can't see of course, I'm holding my roller that it's coming off of so that there's just a tiny bit of tension on the fabric. And just that act of rolling it back and forth with a smidge of tension just smooths out any unevenness that there might be. But actually, I'm quite happy with how that lays. Beautiful. Okay, on to the batting. My batting today is by Winline, and it is 80% cotton, 20% poly. This is my favorite all-purpose batting, is an 80-20. And there are different brands. I've used Hobbs lots and lots over the years and loved that too. I currently order my batting from Winline. So I'm just lining it up with more or less straight with my red snapper at the top. This is still folded in half from cutting it. And by the way, I do get asked a ton, what's the right side up for batting? And the thing with batting, and I talk about this at length in my little course, certain battings have a distinct right and wrong side, and probably different quilters have different opinions about this, but in my opinion, this 80-20 is not partial to which side is up. So I've quilted with both directions up and had perfectly fine results and no problem with it, you know, bearding or piercing through or anything like that. So I just don't worry about it. I just set it up. All right, and here is our quilt. I'll hold it up so you can see. So Bev told me that she used a pattern to make it, and it's just a little crazy quilt reminiscent, right? The block has those few slanted seam lines in it like a crazy quilt would. And then it's got a lovely border around the whole thing. And again, it's all these beautiful floral flannels. This quilt has a lovely story behind it. It's for Bev's granddaughter, and it has a lot of family memories and history and caring stitched up in it, as so many quilts do. All right, so something I'm going to want to watch for, again, because flannel can be a little more shifty than cotton, right? You got to keep a close eye on it, like you do on shifty things. I'm going to keep an eye on my front rail, right, and the seam lines. Because this is constructed in blocks, it's not fully crazy. I do have long horizontal seam lines, and I need to keep assessing them. So every time I advance the quilt, I'll be looking at that again and adjusting, zhuzhing, if you will, right, to make sure that the whole thing is not shifting as I'm working my way down the quilt. So just something to keep an eye on. Okay, thread again. 0761 is the color I'm using. It's kind of a rich, deep tan, right? Equally, I could have used perhaps a denim-y blue. There's quite a bit of blue in this. All the blues that I have ran either toward navy or toward teal, and they didn't look right on this. So I ended up with this rich taupey tan color, and I'm pleased with that. I have currently got my ruler foot loaded, and I'm trying to decide which foot I want on. I think I'm going to put my regular little darning foot on and give that a whirl to begin with. This is how easy it is to change feet on a Bernina. It's just like your sewing machine. If you have a Bernina sewing machine, you flip a little lever and it pops off the old one. You flip the same lever and the new foot pops back on, and I'll keep that ruler foot handy. There are a lot of seam allowances, so I might want to put my cup foot back on, but for now I'm going to start with this one. Okay, let's start basting. I've got my 1/4 inch basting stitch turned on, but if you don't happen to have a basting stitch, you can either baste this with your regular stitch, or you can do it one stitch at a time. My old machine was like that. It didn't have a specific basting stitch, and if I wanted a big baste, I just went one stitch at a time. But I do happen to have the 1/4 inch option. I quite like that. So that's what I'm using here. I do not have my channel locks in place or my belts engaged, holding my machine perfectly still. But what I did do is pay quite a bit of attention to having my edges straight. My corner 90 degrees, my long top edge is straight against that red snapper. This is something that experience has taught me, right? I can, by guess and by gosh, get a really nice straight seam or basted seam. along the top edge of my quilt. If you're not comfortable doing that, you might want to lay some pins in first. You might want to use a yardstick to make sure it's straight, or if indeed you have channel locks or belts that you can engage, you might want to do that. So again, the flannel is wanting to push out in front of my hopper foot. Do we have a close-up shot? Yeah, we do. Can you see that right here? It's wanting to push. Most fabrics do that. Flannel does it even worse. So a couple things that I do to help with that. One is to put some weight on what's already stitched, right? That helps to pull the fabric under the needle a bit quicker. And if that's not doing it enough, then I either grab it with my fingers and pull, or even just with my thumbnail. Can you see that? And that's just encouraging that fabric to get under the needle and not push out in front. Or sometimes I do it with my fingers. Any of those ways work. The trick is you can't just buzz along without doing anything. Your fabric will end up running off in front of you and forming pleats at some point. So this is all part of sort of managing it. These things seem very little, but they make all the difference in the world in getting a really nice and square and flat quilt at the end. So again, this whole idea of basting and a few different ways to do it is something that I teach in my new course as well, because to me, there's not very many things that I say always about, but basting is one of them. You always need to secure the layers of your quilt together, fixed and immovable, before you start actually quilting. And I can see already that with all these seams, can you guys see that? With all these seams, no, not quite. I'm not going to be able to get my backing to go into my tiny, tiny snapper channels very well, and that's fine. This quilt is then a candidate for my 2 side clamps. That's what we'll be using today. And I'm not putting much tension on them. It's essentially just the weight of the clamp and a very, very gentle pull on the elastic. And then I like to use my yardstick, which is buried under here somewhere, just to lift up those strings, and you'll be able to see me at the other end in the overhead camera doing the same thing at the other side. Keep Stella out of the way a little bit. Oh gosh, we've got cameras and cables everywhere here. Whew! It's crazy. Mr. Producer comes in here in the morning before I get here, and sometimes I have to be like, yeah, no, you can't. I can't actually quilt with that there. Extra sip of coffee. Okay, any questions before we actually dive into quilting? Okay, I'm putting my clamps on the front rail, by the way, while Mr. Producer loads a question or two, securing that 4th side of my quilt. Okay, questions. I'm ready. I'll move Stella. Stella's the Longarm's name, by the way, if you haven't met her. Okay, like this. Hello, Susan. How do I get a mistake-prone producer like you?
That's me.
He. Oh, I see. Oh my gosh, Mr. Producer, he's so funny. He's so funny. I was gonna say, you know, he hires himself out. In case you want to have fun like this too. Bobbin with Brittany. Is your studio in a basement or main level? Does the machine noise bother your family? Oh, super question. It is in a basement, but it is walkout. To my right is a set of French doors, and in front of me, which you can't see, of course, is a nice big window. So it's a lovely daylight basement, and it's not low ceilinged or feel like a basement in any way. We currently rent where we live, and we shopped specifically for this. Number one, we're on concrete, right? Because my machine does have vibration. And number two, our nearest neighbor is like, we do live in a duplex, but has walls and rooms between. So there's no chance of her hearing this. And I'm underneath the kitchen. So yes, my family can hear me when I am stitching, but I don't do it 8 hours a day. And right now it's just Mr. Producer and I. We're empty nesters, so he's gone most of the day anyway at his day job. So there's a long explanation to that short question.
This has a QQ, so I have to show it.
Okay, this one has a QQ. How did you become such a good producer, Mr. Producer? He learned that by trial and error, and today is the trial. Oh, that's how it goes some days. Julie, our back seams pressed open. Will seams on top and backing pose special challenges? The backing seams are not pressed open. They're pressed to one side. There are so many of them. I'm totally fine with that. I do say often, if you've got just one seam running through a backing, it will lay flatter and smoother in the quilt if it is pressed open, right? But when there's so many like this and essentially you've got a pieced backing, it doesn't matter all that much. And as a whole, they're not intersecting or super bulky, so I don't think it's going to be an issue, but I will watch for that. And if I find that my machine is hesitating or hiccuping a little bit over some of those intersections, I'm going to change feet on it to my cup foot, which you've seen me use before when I do have bulky things. It's not going to be a problem to stitch through. I just want to make sure that it's all moving smoothly, right? So I will be attuned for that as I'm quilting. Grant, do the seam allowances have to be bigger for flannel because of fraying? I've heard this from some sources. I'm starting a flannel quilt, and the pattern which uses flannel says 1/4 inch as usual. This one has 1/4 inch as well. I would say if you're sewing the quilt fairly quickly and then going ahead and quilting it, it's not an issue. It's just if it's going to be handled or hang around for long periods of time, flannel does fray more than some cottons. That's a fact. But this one has 1/4 inch seam allowances, and it's fine. They're all intact. And it's fine. Nicole, do you happen to have local in-person classes? And if so, how do I find those? I don't currently, Nicole, because actually my studio is not all that big. I've got my Longarm with its back to a wall and facing my room, and there's just really not space for a classroom of people other than a few sort of standing over the rails. So no. Oh, Mr. Producer reminding me this, and this is true. I do still travel a little and do some live class. He's laughing at me. Anyway, I do travel several times a year to Stitch House in Texas. So I don't know that you're near Texas, but if you're there, or in fact, if you're near a Bernina quilt shop that has any classroom space, they can always call me and ask. Mr. Producer is going to put a link in the chat. Anyway. You can always email me, support@stitchedbysusan.com, and ask these sorts of questions. But I'm willing to travel and do classes for a shop that wanted to hold them if they have space. Maria, I have the exact same machine and I love it. However, mine is set up different. Did your top front rail have a leader on it when they installed it, or did you have them leave it off on purpose? Left it off on purpose. In the case of my machine, actually, Mr. Producer and I installed my machine. I wanted to fully understand the frame of my machine. I don't know if that was wise or not, but we do understand it. It took us all day, but we do understand it. And so knowing my loading method already before I did that, I just left that top leader completely off. You could try loading the quilt with the leader on, but just not attaching the quilt to it. I'm not sure if that canvas will get in the way as it rolls or not, but if you don't know that this is the loading method that you want, I wouldn't be in too big a hurry to rip it off till you're sure. Hope that helps. Any more? Or we started quilting?
Oh, no, not yet.
Okay, Nicole, where did you get the white long side clamps? They're by the Red Snapper people. Mr. Producer's putting a link in the chat, and there's also a long batch of stuff I use at the end of almost all my YouTube episodes, for sure all the live and unscripted. And the red snappers are in there, and the side, they're called edge clamps. That didn't come to mind for a minute. But anyway, it's made by the Red Snapper people. And I do really, really like them. I like them being long and getting that nice grasp. And I like that they have a very slim profile. There's more. Debbie Fleming, so glad I found your videos when I first started long arming. Learned good habits like basting right from the start, and it's helped me be successful in my quilting. Debbie's a student, and let me tell you, she is indeed successful. Cassie, what was the yardstick for? I'll show you that in a minute. Remind me, Cassie, and I'll do it on the other end where you guys can see it really well. And I'll talk about it. Maria, my front top rail has back leader on it and the front bottom rail has top leader on it. I've been loading mine the same as yours and found it much easier. I mean, if you love my method, then it is certainly an option just to take that one leader off. I don't load anything on my belly bar, right? My quilt layers literally just stream over it. That's all it's used for, is to hold it in place.
I'm not sure what this one means, and so...
Okay, Mr. Producer says I need to translate. How exact are you when loading the back to the front leader when using the red snappers? 1/4 inch? Do you mean like how exact am I in keeping that front edge straight? And the answer is pretty exact. I want that front edge of my backing to be cut perfectly straight, and I line it up with something visual on my canvas leader, usually the hemline, right? I'm definitely within 1/4 inch, maybe quite a bit less than that. Like I try to be as perfectly straight as I can loading that on, because that establishes the straightness of my quilt as I'm rolling it on. If my front edge is a little bit wavy, that's going to mess with my flat and squareness, right?
That's it.
Okay, that's it for questions. Let's get started quilting. Because I like to, I like starting to quilt in the top right-hand corner. Let me move Stella back. Where shall I put her so they can see me? Right there at the other end with my yardstick. Here's what my yardstick is for. Sometimes my side clamps, they're kind of heavy and they're kind of hanging, and when my machine comes down close to them, it's apt to bump into them. And if I use my yardstick and prop it on my front rail and pop it on my leveler bar at the back, I can manipulate those and hoist them up a little bit, right? I don't want to raise them so far that my whole quilt surface is up. That will mess with my tension, but I want to raise it just enough that my machine can slide then under these clamps. Make sense? So anything straight will do, curtain rod, stick, but I happen to have 2 vintage yardsticks, so that's what I use for my end clamps. Okay, we're on to quilting. So I'm using BSR1 today. If you're a Bernina user, that just means Bernina Stitch Regulator. And the number 1 means that it coasts even when I'm holding still like this. Okay, so that's what I've got on. I've got mine set at 10 stitches per inch, which is my preference for edge-to-edge quilting. And I'm going to turn my tension down just a hair. I had it raised on my last quilt. Okay, we're all set. Here we go, you guys. Before I came on air this morning, I filled a fresh new bobbin and I oiled my machine. So we're all set to go. Putting a drop of oil in the bobbin casing is something that I do absolutely every day before I start quilting, but pretty much with every bobbin change. Certainly with every second one. That's just a good habit to get into. So I did mention this is my kind of signature all over feather design. It's an easy feather, there's no backtracking in it, and there's no need to create a spine first. You literally just move all around the surface of the quilt top, it just flows. If you're interested in learning how to quilt this, I have a free class all the time on quilting these feathers. You do have to enroll in it to get access, but then you have it for always. You can come back to it as often as you want to. So that too is linked in the description of pretty much all my YouTube episodes. So it's the free all over feather class. And it walks you through it like from the very beginning. Even if feathers are not your strong suit, I encourage you to give it a try, because I start right with the shape of these feather plumes and some tips on how to make them, and then how to curve your whole row of feathers. I just walk you through it step by baby step, as I often say. Okay, I'm going to make a change here. We're going to quilt on manual mode now, which means, well, you'll see it as soon as I push go. The machine's going to start going at a fixed rate, and then my movements are going to determine the stitch length. I like to start with my stitch regulator on, because now my eye is kind of used to seeing that 10 stitches per inch, and that's what I want to keep achieving, that same approximate stitch length. So here we go. And probably you can see that I no longer have the little red camera lights on, because there is now no camera, no stitch regulator watching or gauging the movement, how fast I'm moving over the fabric. The needle is just moving I'm at 1400 stitches per inch right now, or per minute. And it's up to me now to control the stitch length with smooth movements. I do love quilting like this. It's much more relaxing. The sound of the machine is just smooth and even. It can be a bit terrifying when you're not used to it, so just start out much slower. I always encourage quilters to give it a try, and give it a try long enough to get familiar with the feel of it and get over the terror of it, because I am convinced that it makes you a better and smoother quilter. It forces you to learn how to move smoothly and not in jerky rushes, which is only, oops, we broke a thread, which is always a good thing. And yeah, it's just another tool in our toolbox. I don't know why the thread broke, so my kind of rule of thumb is the first time I write it off as an anomaly. I fix things and keep going. If it happens again, we'll look a little deeper. I can see that my top thread shredded a little. Sometimes when I have a quilt that does have a lot of seams, those seams at that high rate of speed can cause shredding, and it did happen at a seamy area. So I'll kind of think about that. Meantime, we just have to undo a little bit. And it seems like the bobbin thread broke too. I was messing around this week actually with my bobbin loading, because I was getting thread breaks, it seemed like, whenever I put a new bobbin in. And so what I changed the setting on my what would I call it, Dave? Words are escaping me. The button that stops it filling, that sensor, that's what I'm trying to say, so that it would stop a little less full, because it seemed like my bobbins were filling just a touch too much. And then I was getting that thread break early on, and then I would put a fresh bobbin in, or I would put the bobbin back in, and it would be totally fine. So I'm not sure what caused my bobbin thread to break, but you can see I'm almost empty because I loaded one that I already had been using. So I'm going to go ahead and put a new one in now. And here's my new bobbin, and can you see it is not filled?
Move it over just a little bit.
Like that. It is not filled to the very, very, very tip. That works well for me. Like, machines may have slightly different preferences, but you absolutely cannot fill them so full that the thread is brushing the edges of your bobbin casing when the bobbin's spinning around. You will end up with wonky tension at the least, or broken threads. So I found it works well for me to have it, I don't know, 95% full. That's what I'm aiming for under there. I'm just going to take a minute and get a new bobbin loading. Just bear with me half a second so that it's ready next time. Next time I run out of bobbin thread, this will all be ready for me. Our Berninas have onboard bobbin winders, but they are a separate motor, so it just does its thing while I'm quilting. And notice I dropped my little blue seam ripper so I could find my place when I came back. I'm going to try one more time with this little foot. Like, I'm wondering, you know, which variable shall I change? Because there are so many. So for the moment, I've put in fresh bobbin. We're going to stitch again a little bit, see how it goes before I think about changing the foot. I just get those thread tails out of the way. I don't cut them till after I've done some stitching. And I think we'll slow it down just a touch and see if that helps. Now we're at 1300. All over feathers are probably the quilting design that I have used the oftenest over the years. It is a perennial favorite. It always seems to suit traditional or semi-traditional quilts. But even those that are more contemporary, I sometimes use it on. And one of the things that I particularly love about it is that it's such overall even texture. So when you wash the quilt a few times, if it's a cozy couch quilt, it gets that real scrunchy feel that an old-fashioned quilt used to have. All these little round feather shapes kind of pull up and make the loveliest, scrunchiest quality. So you're seeing it today fairly fresh and fairly crisp on this quilt, but it really just improves with use and with washing. And I love that about it. Also, I absolutely love the fact that there are other all-over type feather designs out there for sure, but this one in particular, because it does not have a stitched spine, allows you to just literally meander over a quilt top, quilting it. You don't have to pre-plan, you don't have to pre-quilt in that spine, and you don't have the thread build up over the spine like where you've sewn repeatedly over an area that I see so often in all-over feather type designs. So those are my personal preferences, absolutely, but that's kind of why I developed this one and why I like it so much. Nothing about it catches your eye, like no repeated thread passes or things like that, or large quilted areas. It's just so even and lovely. I think I could just about quilt this with my eyes closed anymore. I have done it on dozens and dozens of quilts over the years. Can you hear how beautifully even the sound of my machine is when I'm quilting like this? That's what manual or constant mode does. You just set the pace at which the needle is moving, and away you go. So it's a much more relaxing sound. If you're quilting for a long period of time, it makes it easier to listen to audible books, for sure. To some extent, this is not a complicated design, but to some extent, your machine moves a little more smoothly too when it's not always trying to compensate, and create that even stitch length. So if you're doing fine things like little tiny bubbles or small curves in some way, this can actually give a smoother movement or feel to the movement of your machine. So again, if you have not gotten up the courage to try manual or constant or unregulated, those all mean the same thing, this type of speed, give it a try, and try it for long enough that you get over your sort of shell shock when the machine just starts going. Start much, much slower than I am now. If your machine is at a percentage, start at under 20. If your machine is at a speed, as mine is, stitches per minute, start at something like 400 or 500. And just get a feel for it so you're not scared of it, and do it long enough that you kind of get used to being able to just have that smooth sound and movement of the machine, and you're in control of the stitch length, your smooth little movements. It's one of my soapboxes. I have a few of those, but that's one of them. Learn to use the manual mode. Every tool has its place, and stitch regulation is an absolutely wonderful tool. But it's not for everything. I guess that's kind of in the forefront of my mind, because I did have someone ask me the other day, you know, if you have stitch regulation, why would you ever think of quilting without it? Well, those are some of my reasons. It is smooth like butter. It is relaxing to listen to. And I am absolutely convinced that over time, it makes you a better quilter, a more in control quilter. Because it forces you to get smooth in your movements. And I think it might cause less shoulder tension, frankly. It's just so smooth. Many of you might also follow my friend Adria Good, who's a wonderful free motion quilter too. And one of the reasons she uses it is because she films quite a lot of her quilting, as I do. And on the Bernina, you get those little red camera lights when you have the stitch regulator on. And they're not bad when you're watching it in person, when you're the one quilting, but somehow on a camera they glare like two big red angry eyes, and they're really distracting. And so she has intentionally gotten used to quilting manually, even with her complex quilting designs, so that she can use a camera and film while quilting without that stitch regulator on. So that's another reason. If you're interested in filming your quilting, you might want that availability. There, I'm on a fabric where you can actually see what I'm quilting. I'll give you a little spoiler from my class on these feathers. If you're able to see, perhaps in the overhead camera, and get a sense of how I'm moving around the quilt, I am basically moving like a giant meander. So if the fact that this does not have a spine and does not have a roadmap, so to speak, is intimidating to you, you actually can do that. You can take a chalk or some marking pencil and literally trace this giant meander across your quilt, and that could be your guiding line. I encourage you to try it without. It's so easy to turn corners with these feathers, and they're so easy to manipulate that you quickly get the hang of it. And also there's a point at the end of each feather, so that's a great stopping opportunity to stop and say, okay, which way do I want to go next? And then you can pivot and make that change as needed. So super versatile design. But as you see, I went meandering all the way toward the left of my quilt, and now I'm meandering all the way back toward the right. And again, because I've quilted this so many times, I've kind of worked out the size of my meander in order to be able to fit two of them in my throat space. So if you have a much smaller machine than mine, maybe you have a 16-inch throat, you probably can't fit two in, but you might make your one a little bigger than mine. Does that make sense? So you can adjust it to suit what your working area is. And in that way too, your feathers become your own. They do not have to be just like mine. Well, whatever that thread break was, seems to have been an anomaly. Knock, knock on wood, really hard. Yeah. And the truth of the matter is, every so often, thread breaks happen, and I'm sure there always is a reason, but sometimes you don't ever really know what it is or figure out what it is. So my kind of way of dealing with it is, when it happens once, I just thread her up and keep on going. When it happens twice, you know, I start rethreading the top or rethreading the bobbin. If it happens 3 times, I might have to start looking a little deeper, right, at factors I can change. But that once seems to have been the trick this time. So all it needed was just, I don't know. This is one of those times where I don't know exactly what it was, but I'll take it. But thread breaks, they do happen from time to time. We are stitching at a high speed. And one of the reasons I love poly thread is because it's so strong and it's intended for high speed stitching. But the fact still remains, sometimes threads do break. The thread that I'm using today, I mentioned, is Isacord brand, which is kind of the one that I stock the most. I also have quite a lot of Wonderfill because I love their Deco Bob, which is their really lightweight bobbin thread. I have a lot of that on hand too, but for my quilting colors, I tend to just invest in one brand because I've got, I don't know, 50 or 60 different colors. And I'm not one to have a little bit of everything on my shelf. That's just personal preference, but I don't want to be messing with different tensions all the time and adjustments, and so I like to use the one that I know. Anyway, the thing about poly threads is this. They are intended for high-speed machines. Isacord in particular was originally developed for high-speed embroidery machines, right? So that lends itself, all those same qualities of strength and versatility lend themselves to long-arm quilting as well. So I know there are absolutely long-arm quilters that use other types of threads, blends, mercerized cotton, you know, all kinds of things. I personally don't like using cotton because it has so much more lint than poly, and it does not have the strength. I cannot go at as high a speeds, even with the super high quality cotton thread. And the lint for me is a deal breaker. There are even certain poly threads that have been quote-unquote cottonized, so they look like cotton threads. They have the more matte finish. That is pretty, and if that's a look you want, fly at it, but they still produce lint like a cotton thread, and the lint is not a little bit more. The lint is like 10 or 20 times as much. So for that reason, I still gravitate toward the poly. It is so versatile and useful, and for the volume of quilting that I do, that's really valuable to me. So for this first pass, I am going to go ahead and lock my stitches and take my machine out. For future passes, I will just let the machine roll forward with it, and I'll show you why in half a second. So I'm undoing all my holding apparatus, my magnets across the front rails, my clamps on both sides. And I'll move Stella for a second so that you can see. You can see my red snappers right here loading, right? Which you can kind of see them. What you can't see is that I have a leveler bar right behind them. And there is only a certain amount of clearance between that leveler bar and the nose of my machine, right? And so what I like to do then is move Stella for this first pass while I get the red snappers under that leveler bar. I just move Stella off past them, and then I'm able to pull those red snappers through that area of clearance. Just like that. And now that they're through, I won't have any trouble with the next passes. I'll just leave my machine attached and it can roll with the whole quilt. Okay. Every pass, I come along the front and I grab quilt and batting. Gentle tug, 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 all the way down. Making sure that they're both smooth this way. Watching for those long seams. Are they straight? I don't want them to be waving at all, right? I don't want them to be angling up one way or the other. So are they straight and even and parallel to my front rail? Yes, they are. Now, another thing about flannel is it's going to want to pull in a little bit with my quilting. The bigger the quilt you have, this happens more. The softer the fabric like flannel, this happens more. So I tug pretty briskly on the side edges to pull that out to the same original shape as best I can before I start basting. So now I'm going back to my 1/4 inch basting stitch and basting this new area of each side. Again, I'm kind of managing my flannel so it doesn't push out in front of my hopper foot. I don't want any excess in front of my needle at any point. Now here, I might be able to get my little side clamp on. There's only one seam allowance and it's pressed nice and flat. Look at that. I did it. If you have any questions, by the way, there's a good time to put them up. I'll get the other side basted and my magnets on, and then we'll pause for a second while I get a sip of coffee and answer some of your questions. If you are just joining, this is a live and unscripted episode, which means I'm quilting in real time on a real client project. It's not so much about the quilting design as you having an opportunity to see a whole quilt being handled and worked with, right? So it's about the big picture. Although, if you do like this quilting design, I call it an all-over feather, and I do have a free class. There's a link in the description, and probably Mr. Producer's putting it in the chat as well. So today I'm working on a flannel quilt with a highly pieced backing, like really it's a two-sided quilt. So in the loading process, we talked a little bit about making sure that that is flat and some ways that you can adjust it if it's not laying quite flat when you roll it on. We've talked about spending a little extra time being sure that the flannel is not getting twisted in any way out of shape, making sure that the seams are staying straight and lined up and it's not stretched or rumpled in any way. And every time I advance, I baste on both sides. And I put my magnets on the front, so all 4 sides of my quilt are secure. None of this is going to shift. None of these layers can shift while I'm quilting, right? That is really important to me. I want a nice square quilt when I'm done. Okay, we got any questions? I've got coffee. Have you got questions? Okay. And by the way, you guys, little side note. We've got a little apprentice here today. One of our good friends, Ruth. She's on the other side of the camera and she's making noises at me. Oh, she's coming with fresh coffee. Do you want to poke your head in the camera for a minute? Come on in, Ruth. There's Ruth. Ruth is here helping Mr. Producer with the thinking that one of these days he might not have to be here every Friday for all this quilting. And Ruth brought me a lovely fresh cup of coffee. Anyway, so it's kind of fun. It's fun in the studio today. All right, questions. Let's have them. Nancy, joined late. Not sure if anyone asked yet, but how much extra fabric do you recommend? I recommend to my clients for sure that they put an extra 4 inches on every side. So measurement-wise, that would be 8 inches longer and 8 inches wider than your quilt, right? You've seen me putting my side clamps on, right? Dealing with the machine bumping up against them, that sort of thing. Those are the reasons. Long armors need space to clamp, a little bit of room to maneuver. And if you're doing custom quilting that involves rulers, I recommend 8 inches on each side because your ruler tends to bump into your loading apparatus too, right? So you need a little more leeway. I was just doing a ruler quilt yesterday and that came to mind. Luda is asking, what is the approximate size of the feather? I would say the ends of my feathers are a bit bigger than a quarter, maybe 20% bigger than a quarter, and the feathers are about 1.5 inches-ish long. About that. Janice, love the feathers, but always seem to end up trying to make them work on the edges of the quilt. I know it's super difficult for you to see today because the edges of this quilt have busy fabrics on them. But in my class, I talk about this, about having something that you can stretch into corners, because you're working with a round and curving feather, but straight edges and corners on a quilt, right? And so I'm doing this kind of comma-shaped feather, but you might think of something else, but something that you can stretch into those corners. It is a bit of a challenge, and it comes with practice. Henry, how large is this quilt and the time it takes? Henry's grand. Oh, I'm sorry. Looked too quickly. The quilt, I'm going on memory here, was 57 by 68. And we probably won't get it done in this one quilting session, because of course I stop and talk a lot in between. In reality, I think this could easily be quilted in 2 hours, but that would be kind of nonstop. I seldom, by the way, quilt fully nonstop. If I don't have you here to talk to and answer questions to, I will go and get a glass of water or do something, right, that shifts my shoulders, shifts my legs. I don't like hunker over my quilt for 2 solid hours. I would be a hurting unit. Victoria, hello from the UK. It's a day off here. I've just come back from my studio. I spent all day working on my new project, which I plan to take to the Festival of Quilts in Birmingham. Victoria messaged me or commented maybe on something the other day, because I'm going to the Festival of Quilts in Birmingham too, and maybe we'll have a chance to meet there, so that would be fun. Jen, since you have Qmatic, do you find you charge more for free motion since it takes more skill and usually takes me much longer? At this point, I don't. I charge the same for an edge-to-edge design, no matter which. They both have their pluses and minuses. This does take more skill, like I've invested more time in mastering this skill for sure. On the other hand, when Qmatic is working, once I've got it set up, once I've got my advance in place, I can do a few other things while it's actually stitching, so I gain back some time. So there's advantages to both. You know, the Qmatic is clearly more of an investment up front. To have that option. So, but anyway, long story short, I charge the same for edge-to-edge quilting, whether freehand or Qmatic. Gretchen, where's your ember cup? I knew somebody was going to ask that. Here's the story. I got up early this morning and used it all morning and forgot to put it back on the charger. So then when it came time to set up for quilting down here with you, it was dead. So I'm sorry about that. That's what happened. Oh, someone has thrown a donation into the super chat, so thank you for that. Mr. Producer's telling me something here. Okay, apparently there's a funny GIF. Let's see. Okay, she threw a funny GIF up. Oh, hysterical. So AI is interpreting her little GIF as Shiba dog happily massaging his cheeks with his mouth wide open. Super cute. Mr. Producer's going to try and find the actual thing. You can do that while I'm quilting, though, yeah? Anyway, thank you for that. Okay, that's pretty cute. Brittany, you may not know this, but I'm very fond of Shibas. We had a purebred Shiba for a number of years, and she was one special dog. Very fun. Okay, more questions? That's it for questions. All right, I'm going to take one more sip, and we'll get back to quilting. Now, I was telling you earlier about how I've kind of sized my feathers so that I can do feathers all the way to one side and feathers all the way back. When I'm doing other freehand designs, I start one pass on the right and work left, start the next pass on the left and work right. You've probably heard me say that. With these feathers, I don't, because I've essentially done 2 passes. Do you follow what I'm saying? With one advance of the quilt. So it wouldn't hurt anything if I started at the other end, but I don't have to. I'm just tucking my yardsticks in while I'm off camera to make sure that I don't whack into the edge of my quilt. I actually think there's enough clearance there. I probably wouldn't, but just to be on the safe side. Nobody wants feathers with square corners, do they? Yeah, this is the end I stopped at. So here we go again. Back onto our manual mode. So as always, I don't talk about this super often because I just whip it out, but I've taken one stitch, I pull up the bobbin thread, this is how I always start, and then I do a few really closely spaced stitches to anchor those threads. And even if I'm in the middle of the quilt, I do it the same way. It's pretty secure. Someone reminded me to cut my threads. You're a wonder. I'm just going to do that right now. And by the way, I do look at quilts before I give them back to clients because often those thread tails are still there. I try and remember to do it as I go, but if not, that gets caught in the quality control when the quilt's done, right? Okay, I'm just thinking through how I'm going to lay my feather in here before I start my machine into motion. So someone had asked earlier if all the seams on the backing were going to be an issue in my quilting from the front. And the short answer is they're not proving to be. I can hear a little bit a difference in tone of the machine as it's crossing over seams. You know, when I don't have a seam on the front, I'm like, oh, that must be a seam on the back. But it's not, in fact, you know, hesitating in any way or having any difficulty going over them. So that's good news. For those of you who maybe are just tuning in, the back of this quilt is about 50% as many seams as the front. It's quite pieced as well. And so we talked about that a little when we were loading it. And fortunately, Bev, whose quilt it is, did it with great care, and so it laid beautifully flat. That was all great and good. I have to quilt with the knowledge that I've got seams on both sides. But it seems to be not giving me any trouble at all, so that's wonderful. Maybe a quick rundown is in order for those of you who are perhaps just tuning in. I'm stitching on Stella. She is a Bernina Q24, and I do have the Q-matic or computerized system, but I'm not using it right now. I'm quilting entirely freehand. I call this design an all-over feather. It's one of my own devising, and I do have a free class teaching this design. It is such a versatile and useful one that I wanted to make it free so as many people as possible can have it, and it can be really helpful. Even just have feathers have gotten you stumped, because I start right from quilting one single feather plume, and then I walk through how to quilt a feather that does not have a quilted spine, right? Doesn't have a stitching line for a spine. And then I go into a lot of detail about how to make them gracefully turn corners, because that's really key to this design. So all of those things can be really helpful no matter how you're quilting feathers, whether it is in a block, even if it's a formal feather. So anyway, that class is always free, always available, and you have access to it. It does not expire. So let's see what else. I am quilting with Isacord 40 weight, 100% polyester thread. I've got a size 90-14 top stitch needle on my machine. It's my current favorite. A friend introduced me to them. A top stitch needle has a slightly longer scarf, which is the area around the eye, and it has a longer eye than a typical, like a universal needle. And I quite like that. It seems to handle every weight of thread that I throw at it, which is not many. I use 40 weight most of the time. But it handles all kinds of fabrics well, and so it's my current favorite. A top stitch needle, like I said, a 90-14 size. I've got my darning foot on that came with my machine. It's kind of the universal quilting foot. And I am stitching in manual mode, which means I've got my machine right now set for 1300 stitches per minute. And when I press the start button, it just starts going at that rate, and it's up to me to move smoothly. And my movements are also determining the stitch length. If I moved more quickly, the stitches would be longer. If I pause too long in one place, 50 stitches in the same hole. This quilt is all flannel, front and back. So definitely, you can't really see or measure the good that my basting and front clamps are doing, but I assure you, if those were not in place, flannel being as soft and as squishy and with as much give as it naturally is, this would be pulling in considerably, and I would be really challenged to keep it square and keep the edges straight. So that's what the basting of the sides and having those magnetic bars or something securing the front, that's what those do. And again, if those of you who are new and didn't see me put my magnetic clamps on earlier, they're just simple hardware store bars. Your machine might have a different apparatus. Perhaps you have, C-shaped acrylic clamps that go on the front. Whatever, in some way, you need to secure that front edge, and that is absolutely critical, I feel, with a flannel quilt, or it will totally stretch out of shape on you. And if all else fails, you can run a basting line across the front while you're laying down this quilting area in the middle. I'm just pausing for a second. There is thread hanging. My bobbin winding spool, for some reason, is vibrating and letting thread hang, and I'm not going to let it drape because something will happen, and it won't be good. So let's just wind that up. Okay, where was I? Some of these florals are some kind of tricky. See where I've stitched. These feathers, when the quilt gets used, first of all, and then especially when it gets washed, they produce the yummiest, crinkliest texture. I think it's the closest I've seen, except perhaps a tiny meander, to producing that crinkled texture that we think of with a vintage quilt. And I do have a soft spot in my heart for that kind of texture in the quilt, absolutely. These live and unscripted episodes, this is a fairly typical one. They are just me live streaming in real time the quilting of an actual project, usually a client project, sometimes one of my own. But as you can see, I didn't choose the fabric for the ability for you to see the quilting design. My goal is to show you the big picture of what quilting a whole quilt looks like. So it includes that loading process, that basting process, how I move around the quilt top, how I keep things square, and all of that. All the things that I wish desperately that I could have found somewhere when I was learning how to quilt, Questions I had. Is it okay to do this? How do I do that? Well, this is me out here quilting in public so that you can see how I do these things. I don't necessarily say this is the right way. I definitely don't say this is the only way. I've changed my methods over time, but I do say this is the way I'm doing it currently. And hopefully you can find benefit from that and help in your own quilting journey. I try to air these approximately twice a month. They are definitely subject to my husband, Mr. Producer, who has a day job, and just other things going on in our life. There's just us. We don't have an official, professional studio or anything like that, so it is subject to life. Speaking of life, we're leaving next week. We are going on a river cruise in Europe. It's our 35th anniversary this summer, so yahoo, we are taking a trip. So, I won't be live for the next couple of weeks, but I've been creating some little reels and clips and shorts and other ways that you can still consume a little bit of quilting content. And of course, some of you are in my advanced monthly membership where there are new lessons going out every month, and those will continue seamlessly. I've got them all ready for you. And as you're quilting, you can think of us, you know, relaxing on a riverboat. It's going to be a thing of beauty. If you are enjoying this episode, I would so appreciate if you would give it a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and if you click on the bell, you will be notified whenever I'm going live as well. And if you enjoy these sessions and get some real value from them, YouTube now has this lovely new feature called Super Thanks, and you are able, if you wish, it's entirely optional, to support our channel in that way. Bobbin with Brittany already did it with that super cute little Sheba gif. Thank you, Brittany. I sure appreciate it. And we try to use all those, we do, it's not try, we do use all those contributions to keep reinvesting in lights and cameras and even training for ourselves. If you look back at my videos of 4 or 5 years ago, you will see the difference. You will see the difference. It is certainly a joy for me to be able to stream like this with other quilters. My mother passed away before the internet was really a thing, but I just can't even imagine what she'd think. You know, she came from the era of physical quilting bees, and that was very much our background. Amish and Mennonite background, and you know, all the women getting together while the men were perhaps doing a barn raising and getting together and having a quilting bee. And I often have wondered what my mom would think if she saw us all, you know, in our own homes at our screens chatting with each other about our quilting. But I tell you what, I'm very grateful for it. I love quilting with other people. I don't even mind time to time embarrassing myself on the show so that you can all learn from my mistakes. I did, it's a little while ago already, but I did at one point take some technology into my aunt's world. Only one of my aunts is still living, my mother's sister. And of course, she was from that era of, you know, hand quilting. And in her world, she's never had a cell phone or a computer or anything like that. However, she's living in a retirement home, and they did have those capabilities. And so, though she lives in a different country from me and sort of across North America, I worked with their event coordinator, and I did like a trunk show on a YouTube episode like this, where I just showed and talked about some of the things that I worked on and showed some of my quilts. And a lot of those ladies were quilters in the day, and it was just so fun to be able to visit with them in that way, and honestly even to show my aunt my work. And if you're wondering what happened, I just ran out of bobbin thread, and my choice, I just quilt till my bobbin runs out. And then those last couple inches don't have good tension on them, right? Because there was hardly any thread left in the bobbin. So that's why I'm undoing to get back to where the tension was good. And also I like to try and get back to either a point or a corner or a seam allowance. The point can sort of camouflage the join of my new thread connecting up. A seam allowance can also help camouflage and anchor the threads a little bit. But in this case, we're going to go to a point. And I'm undoing almost to the point. Are we seeing it? Is it even visible right here? And I'm going to start stitching quarter or half an inch back, like a few stitches back, and I'll go right over it. I'll do my few anchor stitches, and then I'll stitch right over it, and that will anchor that tail. And I like to drop my blue seam ripper right there so that I can find my spot when I come back. Otherwise it can be difficult to find. And again, my bobbin spool is really unspooling. I don't understand this. It does not typically do that, but must be vibrating today. Too much coffee, probably. I'm quite confident I will need a third bobbin, so I might as well go ahead and wind it. And this is my personal preference, is to have 2 spools that match, so that I have one for my bobbin and I don't have to pre-wind them. But you certainly don't have to. You can kind of estimate how many bobbins you need and pre-wind them from your one spool of that color if you want to. You know what? I'm going to put a drop of oil in there because I've heard it rattling a little bit. One of the reasons I love this side clamp, can you see this? I'm able to slip out right over it. I'll slip back on and you can see that part. So I have to get at my bobbin area to put a drop of oil in, right? So I've done that. And now I'm able to slip. Better put my bobbin in first. Hang on a sec. Better put the bobbin in. The great thing about long arming, at least when you're at the front of the machine, is you don't run out of bobbin thread and not realize it. Anyway, see this? I'm able to slip right over that side clamp without having to undo it. That's why I love those slim side clamps. Okay, here's my little spot. Do we have a lot of questions? Let's wait. I'll be done this pass in a moment. Hopefully you can see this. We'll put the close camera on. I don't know how visible it will be, but this is how I splice threads in the middle. So I'm overlapping at least a 1/4 inch. It's probably closer to a 1/2 inch because I'm working at this point. Pull up that bobbin thread, grab both of them, try to, there they are. And now I'm going to take my close stitches, 4 or 5 in really close succession, leave my thread tails for the moment, and I'll try and stitch right back over that point, and all that sort of over stitching will anchor that previous little thread tail. Perfect. It is some kind of hard to see in a few of these fabrics. If you've just lately popped into the live stream, I am working on a client quilt today. Client's name is Bev. This quilt is 100% flannel, top and back. And it's a little bit crazy quilt reminiscent. The big blocks, the 12-inch blocks, have a couple of angled seams in them, so they have that crazy quilt feel. And the backing of the quilt is pieced as well. So there's lots of interest. It's pretty much a two-sided quilt. I'm quilting my all-over feather design, which crinkles up into such lovely goodness in a cozy quilt. And I'm working on a Bernina Q24. I have 100% poly thread loaded in a kind of deep, rich tan color. And I have the same thread in the top and in the bobbin. And I'm quilting in what we quilters call manual or constant mode, meaning there's no stitch regulation happening. My machine is just stitching at a set rate of stitches per minute. In my case, 1300. And my movements then are what is determining the stitch length. And this to me is such a smooth and relaxing way of quilting. I don't always do it, but often. And these live and unscripted episodes are not intended to be lessons, but rather for you to have an opportunity to see an actual quilt being worked on, to see exactly what time things take, to see that thread breaks do happen to the best of us at the worst possible moment. It's just the nature of it. And just to kind of see, it's not edited. So you get to see things in real time, and you get to see real decisions being made on the fly and all that sort of stuff. So there we are at the edge of a pass. Now I'm going to stop with needle down, and I'm just going to move the machine with my quilt this next time I roll it up. Just saves a moment. So I'm unattaching all my bits that were holding it secure. And we'll take a brief moment for me to have a sip of coffee and you to ask any questions. Let's do that right now, yeah, before we start the next advance, Mr. Producer. Fresh coffee is so good. So good. Okay, questions about the cruise. Lorraine, enjoy your trip. Where in Europe will you be cruising? We're starting in Paris and we're ending in Prague. And obviously there's not a river that connects the two. So, some of it is on a coach and some of it is in a boat. But it's called a river cruise. Yeah. Barbara, love watching you actually quilt in real life. Good. I mean, that is my intention, is that I just show you, welcome you into my studio and show you, let you look over my shoulder and see what it looks like. Laurie, loved your old videos, just Susan and her whiteboard. I learned a lot from those simple videos. I think the whiteboard was a certain season, Laurie. Must have been maybe early in the pandemic when I was teaching designs on a whiteboard. I was kind of more referring to early ones at the Longarm. It was such a challenge to figure out how to deal with the bigness of it and the vibration of it and all those things. So you can see how far we've come in those, between those videos and these. Victoria, have you ever quilted a cathedral windows top? I have not. The only cathedral windows that I worked on was my own, and it was the traditional kind where, you could kind of lift some of the layers, and that's done by nature of hand stitching it, and that's how mine was done. I know there are cathedral window reminiscent patterns that are quilted, and I don't see any reason why you couldn't, but I haven't done one, no. Nancy, last year we took Viking from Budapest to Amsterdam. It was totally amazing. You'll enjoy. Happy early 35th. Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate it. We have read nothing but good reviews, so we're totally looking forward to it. Okay. Not too many questions, so we'll just keep on quilting. Now, I've got for sure 2, maybe 2.5 passes left. So I don't think we'll finish this today because there's a solid close to an hour left in this yet between our talking and all the things. But let me show you my advancing process. Oh, what has happened? What has happened? There we are. I'm actually going to undo Stella now that I talked about leaving her there while I rolled ahead, because I want to show you a little something, a little precaution that I take with the flannel. So let's move her out of the way. So first thing I do, and I always do this when I advance, is grab quilt and batting and tug gently all the way across, making sure that it's all smoothed down flat. Kind of assess my seam lines. Is everything still running straight and smooth? Where the seam isn't straight, I'm putting a little more pressure and pulling on it, right? So I have a nice straight line there. This flannel is wanting to pull in a little bit, right? So I showed you with the first pass, I tugged on both edges. Okay, I'm going to go one step further now that I've got a roll on my rail. And that is to work from the middle of this rail and push it toward the edges. And I push hard. And I can push the edge of my quilt out significantly doing this. And then tug it again. And that just keeps it pushed out to its full width. We don't want the quilt to keep getting narrower and narrower as we go down it, right? We don't want this to start working its way in from the edges. We want all the layers to stay even. So that's one of the ways I do it. That, by the way, can be a really great tip if you're using, oh, I don't want to put my clamps on yet. If you're using digital designs, it can be an issue for the fact that the quilt pulls in and it's hard to get your pattern to line up with what came before. And so that's one of the ways that I really deal with that. Get that quilt back to its original proportion and shape. So as always, I'm basting both sides securely in place. This time we do have seams that aren't as flat on the edges, so I'm just going to do my 2 single clamps. Yardstick to hold them up a smidge. We're good to go there. I'll go ahead and pick up my magnets on my way back. And again, as I said earlier, if you don't have magnetic rails or you don't have magnets, you can also use some types of C-clamps or rings that would snap over the front. You can also put a row of pins, nose to tail, but in some way, this edge needs to be secured so that it can't shift while you're quilting. You're controlling that quilt and keeping it square while you're working on it. A lot of these very basic, what I consider basic sort of essentials of getting high quality results are the subject of my new class, Machine Quilting for Beginners. And it is not only for long armers, but for sit-down machines as well. I'm a reasonably proficient quilter at my domestic sewing machine. And just these processes of how to keep the quilt square, how to keep the layers aligned and from shifting are critical, along with tons of other practical stuff like what batting to use and needles and so forth. I just needed one more sip to wet my whistle. Oh, Mr. Producer says there's a question I should get here. Lorraine, I see how you do that pushing out the edges with manual, but how do you manage that when using Q-matic? In exactly the same way, Lorraine, when I have stopped to advance my quilt, right, and I've rolled it up on that take-up roller, I'll walk around to the back of the machine and just push that out like crazy. In other episodes, I've shown you guys sometimes that I have a tape measure on my leveler bar, so I can actually see my quilt was at 27 on this side and 54 on this side, right? And so I know where that quilt was when I started. So even when I'm using my Q-matic, I'll do that same pushing it out to try and get it back to that measurement with the beginning of each advance, so that my pattern lines up correctly with what came before. Hope that all made sense, Lorraine. I forgot those thread tails again, but I'll catch them in the QC pass later. Whichever of you was asking earlier about how you deal with the edges of the quilt, did you notice how I just did a portion of the feather that appeared to fall off the quilt? I do that often. If I can't fit a whole one in, you can make it fall off. Or, you could have done a tiny one. Either way will work. But that's how I deal with the straight edges of the quilt when I have a design that's nothing but curves. Actually, I do that with most designs. I can arrange them such that they appear to carry off the edge of the quilt. That sort of stuff. I don't want to spend tons of time today talking about my classes. However, because I say so often that these episodes aren't intended to be lessons, and they really aren't, they're just the practical aspects of quilting, yet I do teach these things in some way. So things like how I arrange my quilting to fit within the parameters of a quilt, or how I deal with when it wants to just run off the edges. Those are the types of things that I talk about in my free motion quilting masterclass. And that is opening up for enrollment again in late May. So in that one, I teach a selection. There's over 25, I think there might be 27 different edge-to-edge freehand designs. So not this specific one, because this one is a free class, but designs like this, where you're just moving all around the quilt top with the same design repeating. And because I'm a practical gal, that course is filled too with really practical tips. Tips like how to fit it in the corners of the quilt. Tips like how to move around the quilt top without sort of painting yourself into a corner, quilting yourself into a corner, that sort of thing. So that class is coming up too if you want more in-depth teaching, more sort of hand-holding, and with it, like all the classes are pre-recorded and you just have access to them for always. But with it, I always do a series of live Zoom sessions as well, where you can ask any questions. And I'm not generally at my long arm at them, but I have my iPad and a doodle pen. And so we can sit and work through some things that are stumping you. So that's kind of part of that class curriculum, is that you get access to some of those live sessions with me as well. So that's what that all looks like. Again, information is in the notes below. All the information on all the various classes that I offer is on my website, stitchedbysusan.com. And by the way, if you want advance notice of when these live sessions are coming, sign up for my newsletter to get that as well. And I try to pack my newsletter with as much useful stuff as I can as well, and that's just who I am. I love sharing tips, I love collecting tips, and I love sharing them. So find a lot of those in my newsletter as well. Same place for that. Head to the website. You'll get a little pop-up inviting you to join the newsletter. I haven't really asked any of you what projects you're working on today. I trust you're all feeling the freedom to chat amongst yourselves in the chat window as I churn out my feathers. These live and unscripted episodes tend to go on at some length, so it's a great opportunity for you to just have them going in the background while you're working on something of your own. Oh, this blue floral is wicked for seeing what's been quilted on it. I have to squint, see what's going on there. Oh, I saw that happen and I wondered. I went over a thick seam allowance and it just shredded the thread. And by the way, that is a slight risk I run with the manual mode. If I were stitching in regulated mode, I would have the time to adjust and slow down over a seam allowance like that, and I might have been able to avoid that. But it's not the end of the world. You will get to see how I splice my thread in the middle of a quilt. So first off, I'm pulling up the bobbin thread. So it comes to the top and I can trim it because it kind of gnarled. Make sure I get all that gnarl pulled to the top. And trimmed. Well, you might not be able to see it because look, we've got our trusty blue fabric that we can't see a thing on. I do need my seam ripper. So in this case, we don't have poor tension, right? Because the thread just broke right there, right over this seam allowance here. So I'm going to put it on manual while I'm thinking of it, my machine. And what I'm going to do is back up a little bit so that my threads overlap on this seam allowance here, because there we've got multiple layers of fabric and that just adds to the security of my thread splice. I don't want my stitching coming undone. And actually this one right here, I go beyond it. I might just do it right here because that is crazy secure. Why undo it? So I'm going to overlap my stitching a generous 1/4 inch over what was there before. Grab my bobbin thread and pull it up. Bobbin thread feels very snug. I'm actually going to run out to the side of the machine and pull that bobbin thread out and reseat it. Because anything might have happened, right? With the thread breaking with a jerk like that, it might have, unseated the bobbin. It just doesn't feel quite right. And I have learnt the hard way. Yep, sure enough, it's wrapped around the post inside, and now I've popped the spring out of it. Oh, joys. Anyway, I've learnt the hard way. Pay attention. If it doesn't feel right or sound right, stop and investigate. All right. There is no way to show you guys this. I just don't have the lighting for it. But what has happened is my little anti-backlash spring.
Hold on a sec, I'm zooming in on you, dear.
I don't think you can. If I go over to this side, you can sort of see. In the bottom of my bobbin case, right, is that little anti-backlash spring. That's what produces the bounce in my bobbin, and that's what breaks the bobbin when, break like B-R-A-K-E, when there's always a little pressure against it from the spring when it's seated in the machine, and when I stop stitching, it stops the bobbin from turning, right? Absolutely a critical piece of my equipment. But what happened is my thread in that jerk, it actually got wound around the post an extra time, and when I pulled the bobbin out, I popped that spring. So I'm just making sure that it is seated back in the right place. Look at that. Bingo. Back into the machine we go. If you want more details on that, Jamie Wallen has some great videos on tension, and he goes through that bobbin apparatus in detail. But you can see the springiness that's in my bobbin. That's from that little spring, and that is right, and that is critical. All right, can't see where I'm going under there. Yep, and now it feels right. That is something, I don't know how to teach you that, but I always encourage quilters, get to know your machine, because I could literally feel there was a little bit, not a lot, but a little too much resistance on that bobbin thread, and right away I'm like, that's not right. I would have ended up with broken thread again, right? So we learn these. There's no easy way to do that. You just quilt and quilt and quilt and get to know your machine. So again, overlapping my stitching, 1/4, 3/8 of an inch. Putting my few anchor stitches in. I've got my stitch regulator on so that I can get over this lumpy seam a little more slowly and then move on. Mr. Producer's telling me we're at 2 hours. So Shall we finish this pass or shall we take questions and call it? There's no questions at the moment. Okay, let's do it this way. I'll keep quilting for a few more minutes. It's your opportunity to ask any questions. Might be about this quilt or this quilting design or the other things I've talked about, like my new course or, I don't know, upcoming places that I'm traveling or what have you. I'm happy to answer any more questions before we go, and then within the next 10 or 15 minutes, we'll wind it down. Let me get organized again because this is my lovely blue fabric. I got to see where I've been and where I need to go next. And that seam definitely was thick. I could hear the needle thump, thump, thump as it went through it. I can't get at my threads. I'll do that later. But now that we're past it, I think we can go back on our manual mode. Oh, I know something that I have not mentioned. This last week, I was a guest on Karina Gardner's podcast, and it is called, oh, Dave, would you mind looking that up for me? If you don't know Karina Gardner, she is a super talented artist, and she does surface design, which means all kinds of things. Fabric lines, designs on china, on stickers, on papers, on wallpaper, home decor, all the things. Anyway, fabulous creative. And Dave is going to look up the name of the podcast because, of course, it's many, many weeks, several months since we actually recorded it, and it's just not coming to mind at the moment. So he's going to look that up. But if you look up Karina, Carina, Karina Gardner, you will certainly find that. And you might be interested in giving that a listen. My most recent podcast episode is kind of interesting, I think, too. It was with a lady named Sarah Beckvar. Sarah is from England, and she makes greeting cards, but she uses basically free motion quilting at her domestic sewing machine and tiny scraps of fabric and makes the most charming cards. So follow her, look her up. Sarah Beckvar, Becvar. Look her up on Instagram. She's got lots and lots and lots of little tiny videos of her making these cards, and she sells the cards for purchase. But I, of course, have taken the little bit that I'm able to glean from her tiny videos and made a few myself, and it's really fun. It's really fun. And as free motion quilters, we kind of get this idea of freely moving over a surface and drawing on it, if you will. So same technique, but it was super interesting to talk with her. So that you can find, again, from my website. There's a podcast page there with all the episodes, but Sarah Beckvar is the most recent. I'm at the bottom edge. Let's have a few more sips of coffee, a few more chats. Any questions or comments you guys have?
Well, I have a whole bunch of comments that I will throw on the screen here in a moment.
Ah, so good. So good. Okay, question. I tend to like the quilting a bit looser. What would be the biggest you would do a feather? You had said you were doing about 1.5 inch feathers. I think you could do them any size you wanted to. The bigger they are, the harder it is to move smoothly, right? So you certainly want to be able to do that kind of meandering shape within your throat space. So, but consider, I mean, liking looser quilting usually translates in my mind to you like softer quilts. So think about the possibility of maybe which batting you use that can contribute to that as well. Like I would not say at 1.5 inch that I get any kind of a stiff quilt. I think 80-20 batting still keeps that really soft feel to the quilt. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on making a design bigger. It just becomes exponentially more difficult to move around easily. Debbie, aw, you're so sweet. Susan's masterclass is worth every penny. It was the best investment I've made since buying my Longarm. Thank you, Debbie, for that. And again, you can find all my learning options on my website under the Learn tab. The Free Motion Quilting Masterclass is there too. Nita, my Longarm went in for repair. 3 weeks till she comes home. Oh my goodness, are you suffering terrible withdrawal? This is a good time to learn to do some designs at your sit-down machine. Maybe you already do, Nita. I think you're a pretty accomplished quilter, but I'm kind of half serious. Full joke. Victoria, your live shows are priceless. I've recently quilted my pixel quilt with straight lines following your advice, and it turned out perfect. I'm so happy to hear that. Good. Good, good. Anita, again, working on my domestic baby lock to finish quilting a wall hanging of 9 baskets with embroidered flowers in each basket. Ooh, that sounds pretty. Yum. And Muriel, thank you. I so appreciate all your tips and advice. Beautiful quilting. Thanks so much, Muriel. And you guys, thanks a ton for joining me. I appreciate it so much. YouTube is always going to be free. You kind of pay by watching ads. But also, if you want to support my channel, you can do that by using the super thanks button. And we sure appreciate that. We invest all those dollars back into keeping our equipment getting ever better and training ourselves and giving you a better and better production. So thanks so much for joining us. Until the next Live and Unscripted, I'll see you next time.